Ma'am, this isn't a fashion show. The sign says all electronics out of the bag. Are we having a problem understanding simple instructions today? The voice of TSA Agent Miller was a sour blend of boredom and authority, a sound that echoed off the cold linoleum floors and gray plastic bins of the airport security checkpoint. The crowd, a shuffling, anonymous river of travelers, offered a few nervous chuckles. They were fleeting, complicit laughs from people just glad the attention wasn't on them. The woman, the target of his condescension, didn't react. She stood there, a study in stillness amidst the frantic energy of LAX. There was nothing remarkable about her. She wore simple jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and worn-out boots. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, functional ponytail, and her face, devoid of makeup, was a placid mask. She looked to be in her late 30s, with a lean, wiry frame that seemed almost lost in the cavernous terminal. She was forgettable by design, a ghost in the machine of modern travel. But when the retired four-star general 2 places behind her in line saw the way she stood, a flicker of something ancient and dangerous sparked in his memory. It wasn't a posture of defiance, but of readiness. Feet shoulder-width apart, weight perfectly balanced, her hands resting calmly at her sides, not fidgeting, not clenched. It was the stance of a predator at rest. The general narrowed his eyes. He had seen that stance before, in places where the air tasted of dust and fear, on individuals who moved through the world like whispers of violence. He watched as Agent Miller, puffed up with the petty power of his uniform, continued his tirade, his voice growing louder with each unanswered barb. He saw the woman's eyes, calm and gray as a winter sea, scan the environment not as a tourist, but as an operator. She wasn't just looking, she was assessing. She clocked the exits, the positions of the other agents, the choke points in the crowd. Her lack of response wasn't weakness, it was discipline. It was the profound, unshakable calm of someone who had faced down terrors that would make Agent Miller's worst nightmares seem like a pleasant dream. The general felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. This agent, in his ignorance, was poking a sleeping lion with a stick. If you believe that true strength is forged in silence and proven by action, then you understand the storm that was about to break. It was a storm that would not be loud, but its effects would be devastating, reshaping the very definition of respect within these sterile walls for years to come. The world often makes the mistake of equating noise with power, forgetting that the most potent forces in the universe, gravity, time, change, operate in absolute silence. Agent Miller was a creature of noise. His jangling keys, his booming voice, his performative sighs of exasperation were all tools to project an authority he felt he was owed, but had not earned. He saw the woman before him and his mind, a blunt instrument of assumption, processed a simple, flawed equation. Plain appearance plus silent compliance equals insignificance. He saw a nobody, a person who could be used as a public lesson to speed up the line and reinforce his own fragile dominance. "Hello? Earth to Space Cadet," he said, snapping his fingers near her face. "Laptop, tablet, anything with a battery. Let's go." Some of us have a job to do. The insult hung in the air, thick and unpleasant. The woman simply blinked, a slow, deliberate motion. Then, with an economy of movement that was almost hypnotic, she unzipped her small, unassuming backpack. It was a simple, military-style pack, faded and scuffed from use, the kind of bag that held stories rather than souvenirs. Miller smirked, expecting to find the usual jumble of travel clutter. Instead, he saw order. Perfect, methodical order. Every item was packed with a purpose. There were no superfluous things. A small, vacuum-sealed pouch of clothes, a water bottle, a dog-eared paperback novel, and a single, heavy, metal object wrapped in oilcloth. It was this object her hand went to. She moved with a practiced grace, her fingers unwrapping the cloth with a familiarity that spoke of countless repetitions. Miller's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He had expected a laptop. He was not prepared for what she placed in the gray plastic bin. It was a solid block of machined steel, intricately carved, with a worn wooden grip attached to one side. It was heavy, dense, and utterly unfamiliar to him. It looked like a piece of some arcane machine, something ancient and powerful. It bore no markings he could recognize. only the silent patina of long and arduous use. "What the hell is that?" Miller demanded, his voice losing some of its bluster. The woman looked at him, her expression unchanging. Her voice, when it finally came, was low and even, without a trace of anger or fear. It was the voice of someone stating an undeniable fact. "It's a training weight," she said. "For my grip." She said nothing more. She didn't explain that it was a custom-milled replica of the grip and trigger assembly of an M210 sniper rifle, weighted to the exact gram, an object she had held for thousands of hours in darkness and in light, in heat and in cold, until it was no longer a tool, but an extension of her own body. She didn't explain that it was a physical mantra, a connection to a discipline that had saved her life and the lives of her teammates more times than she could count. She didn't need to. The object itself, in its silent, formidable presence, was explanation enough. It was a piece of her hidden world, laid bare in the sterile, fluorescent light of the terminal, and it radiated an aura of competence so profound that it began to slowly, inexorably, suffocate the arrogance of the man who had so foolishly challenged its owner. The line had stalled. The quiet spectacle had drawn more eyes now, a silent audience to the strange, tense tableau. Miller, flustered by this unexpected turn, felt his authority slipping. He was supposed to be in control, but the woman's unnerving calm and the bizarre, intimidating object in the bin had completely derailed his script. He fell back on procedure, his voice now laced with a defensive, bureaucratic sharpness. "That's not an approved item. I'm going to have to confiscate this and call my supervisor." He reached for the steel block, but before his fingers could touch it, a sudden commotion erupted from the back of the line. A sharp cry of pain, followed by the heavy, sickening thud of a body hitting the floor. Chaos bloomed in an instant. People screamed, stumbling back, creating a chaotic, panicked void around a fallen figure. Agent Miller's head snapped toward the sound, his training momentarily forgotten in the face of a real crisis. He fumbled for his radio, his face a mask of confusion and alarm. We have a situation here. A man down. Requesting medical assistance at checkpoint 7 inches." Voice was thin, reedy, the voice of a man reading from a manual, not a man taking command. But the woman, Evelyn Reed, was no longer looking at him. Her entire being had shifted in a fraction of a second. The placid, unremarkable traveler was gone, and in her place stood something else entirely. Her eyes, once calm, were now alight with a frightening intensity, sweeping over the scene, processing dozens of variables in the time it took others to gasp. She saw the fallen man, elderly, clutching his chest. She saw the panicked crowd, a dangerous, unpredictable stampede waiting to happen. She saw the other TSA agents, frozen in place, looking to Miller for guidance he was incapable of giving. She saw the entire tactical problem laid out before her like a map. While Miller was still speaking into his radio, she was already moving. She didn't run, she flowed through the chaos. With a low, authoritative voice that cut through the noise like a surgeon's scalpel, she issued her first command. "You," she said, pointing a finger at a young man in a college sweatshirt who was filming the scene with his phone. "Call 911. Tell them suspected cardiac arrest. Male, approximately 70 years old. Go." Now, the command was so absolute, so devoid of hesitation, that the young man obeyed without thinking. Her next words were to the crowd. "Everyone back up. Give him space. Stay calm." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried an undeniable weight, the ingrained authority of someone who had led men into situations far more terrifying than this. The panicked herd of people actually listened, taking a collective step back, their fear momentarily subdued by the sheer competence in their midst. She reached the fallen man's side in 3 long strides, dropping to her knees. Her hands, which had been so still moments before, were now a blur of efficient, practiced motion. She checked his pulse at the carotid artery. It was weak and thready. She checked his airway, tilting his head back with a practiced motion. Her hands moved over his chest, searching for the right spot. She was a machine of pure, focused action. Miller, finally looking away from his sputtering radio, saw what was happening and tried to reassert his broken authority. "Ma'am, step away from the passenger. You are interfering with." His words died in his throat as she turned her head and looked at him. It was just a glance, but it carried the force of a physical blow. In that look was the cold, hard certainty of 1,000 life-or-death decisions. It was a look that said, "I am in control here. You are irrelevant." Miller fell silent, his mouth hanging slightly open. He was no longer a gatekeeper. He was a spectator. He was witnessing a level of crisis management, of sheer, unadulterated competence, that he had only ever seen in movies. But this was real. The woman's hands began to move in a steady, rhythmic compression on the man's chest, a perfect, metronomic beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. She was not just performing CPR. She was conducting an orchestra of survival in the heart of the chaos she had single-handedly tamed. The deafening silence that followed her initial actions was more profound than any noise. The panicked screams had subsided, replaced by a collective, awestruck hush. The only sounds were the soft squeak of Evelyn's boots on the linoleum, the steady count of her chest compressions, and the distant, approaching wail of sirens. The crowd formed a wide, reverent circle around her and the fallen man. They watched, mesmerized as she worked. There was no wasted energy, no theatrical flair. Every movement was precise, economical, and imbued with a singular purpose: to hold back the encroaching darkness. She was a master craftsman at her trade, and her trade, it was now terrifyingly clear, was the art of imposing order on chaos. Agent Miller stood frozen, his radio clutched in his hand like a useless talisman. The world had just been turned upside down. The woman he had dismissed as a space cadet, an insignificant nonentity, was now the calm, immovable center of a life-or-death emergency. Her quiet confidence, which he had mistaken for weakness, was revealed to be an ironclad discipline forged in crucibles he could not even begin to imagine. His arrogance had shattered like cheap glass, leaving behind the sharp, cutting shards of humiliation. He saw the looks on the faces of the other passengers, no longer amused, but filled with a mixture of awe and contempt for him. He had been judged, and he had been found wanting. When the paramedics finally burst through the terminal doors, they found a scene of remarkable order. The crowd was calm and parted for them. The patient was on his back, receiving perfectly executed CPR from a civilian. One of the paramedics, a hardened veteran of city trauma, took one look at Evelyn's technique, at the depth and rhythm of her compressions, and nodded in professional appreciation. "She knows what she's doing," he murmured to his partner. "Take over on my count." Evelyn relinquished control seamlessly, providing a quick, concise report as they hooked up the defibrillator. Male, approximate 70. Witnessed collapse at 14:32. No pulse upon my arrival. Began compressions immediately. 2 minutes of CPR completed. Her words were clipped, technical, the language of professionals. There was no emotion, only data. As the paramedics worked, shocking the man's heart back into a ragged rhythm, another figure stepped out from the silent crowd. It was the retired 4-star general, his face grim and set. He had watched the entire event unfold, his initial suspicion hardening into absolute certainty. He walked past the gawking TSA agents, his eyes fixed only on Evelyn. He stopped directly in front of the still-stunned Agent Miller, who flinched as if expecting a blow. The general ignored him completely, his focus locked on the quiet woman who was now wiping a stray bead of sweat from her brow, her work done. The general was a man whose presence was a force of nature. His name was General Marcus Thompson, former commander of Joint Special Operations Command. His face was a roadmap of a life spent in service and conflict, and his eyes held the weight of command. He looked at Evelyn, who was now standing up, brushing the dust from her jeans as if she had merely helped someone with their luggage. The chaos had receded, leaving her once again in a bubble of profound calm. The paramedics were loading the now stabilized man onto a gurney, his life saved by her swift, decisive action. The hum of the airport was slowly returning, but the atmosphere at Checkpoint 7 remained charged, tense, waiting for the final act of the drama to play out. General Thompson took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice was not loud, but it resonated with a power that silenced the entire area. It was the sound of ultimate authority, the voice of history itself. He did not address Miller or the other agents. He spoke directly to her. "Commander Reed," he said, the 2 words dropping into the silence like stones into a deep well. "It's an honor to see you again." Evelyn finally looked up, her gray eyes meeting his. For the first time, a flicker of recognition, of shared understanding, passed across her features. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "General," she acknowledged, her voice a quiet murmur. Agent Miller's face went from pale to ghostly white. "Commander?" The word didn't compute. This woman, this plain, silent woman he had belittled and mocked? The title was an impossibility, a tear in the fabric of his reality. He stared, his mind struggling to reconcile the person he had insulted with the title the general had just bestowed. It was a rank that commanded respect, a rank earned through decades of service, leadership, and sacrifice. It was a rank that belonged to someone important, someone powerful. Not to her. It couldn't be. But the general was not finished. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, and pinned Agent Miller with a gaze as cold and hard as a glacier. The full weight of his 4 stars seemed to press down on the agent, crushing his last vestiges of self-importance. "Agent," General Thompson began, his voice dangerously low, "you have a difficult and often thankless job. We entrust you with our safety. But that trust is predicated on a foundation of professionalism and respect, 2 qualities you have shown a catastrophic lack of today." He paused, letting the words sink in, letting the entire audience of travelers and airport staff hang on his every syllable. "You made an assumption," the general continued, his voice cutting through the air. "You looked at this woman and you saw nothing. Let me correct your vision. Let me tell you what you should have seen." He took a step closer to Miller, who seemed to shrink inside his uniform. "You are looking at Commander Evelyn Reed, United States Navy. For 22 years, she was a member of a unit whose name you are not cleared to hear. She is a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross for actions taken during Operation Serpent's Tooth. She holds 2 silver stars for gallantry, for bronze stars with valor, and a Purple Heart from a mission in the Zarin Pass, where she held off an enemy force 3 times her size for 17 hours after her entire team was incapacitated, saving them all." Each medal he named was a hammer blow to Miller's crumbling worldview. The crowd murmured, the words Silver Star and Distinguished Service Cross rippling through them. These were not just awards. They were legends, chapters in the hallowed story of American valor. They were names spoken with reverence in the halls of the Pentagon, names belonging to the ghosts and giants of the nation's wars. And this quiet, unassuming woman wore them all. "She has more combat hours than most entire battalions." The general's voice rose, filled with a righteous anger. "She has planned and led operations that have fundamentally altered the security of this nation. The reason you can stand here in this air-conditioned terminal and harass citizens is because she and people like her have spent their lives in the dark, dangerous corners of the world, doing the hard, bloody work that keeps the peace. She is not a space cadet, she is a national asset. A hero. And you, in your profound and spectacular ignorance, treated her with less respect than you would a piece of lost luggage." The general's indictment was absolute, a public vivisection of Miller's character. But the final, devastating blow was yet to come. As if on cue, a group of 10 men, moving with the quiet, coordinated purpose that screamed military discipline, approached the checkpoint. They were all in civilian clothes, but they moved as one, a silent phalanx of muscle and coiled energy. They were large men, with the hard, weathered faces and watchful eyes of those who have seen too much. They were her team, the SEALs. They weren't in uniform, but their bearing was a uniform in itself. They parted the crowd without a word, their presence alone commanding a path. The lead man, a mountain with a thick beard and sorrow in his eyes, was carrying a polished wooden and glass case, a shadow box. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark blue velvet, was a collection of medals, ribbons, and a crisply folded American flag. It was the display for the memorial service they were all flying to attend, the service for the one member of their team who hadn't made it home from the last deployment. They stopped behind Evelyn. The lead SEAL looked at General Thompson and gave a short, respectful nod. Then he looked at Evelyn, his expression softening. "We're ready when you are, Commander." He held up the shadow box. "Brought Dan's medals. Figured you'd want to see them before we check the case." The visual was devastating. Here, in the harsh fluorescent light of the TSA checkpoint, was the tangible proof of a life of service and sacrifice. The medals in the box belonged to a fallen hero, and they were being carried by his brothers in arms, led by the very woman Agent Miller had so casually humiliated. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. Miller stared at the medals, then at Evelyn, then at the 10 silent warriors standing behind her, a protective wall of loyalty and respect. His face, which had been a canvas of shock and humiliation, finally crumpled into something else: utter, soul-crushing shame. The general took one last look at the broken agent. He didn't need to say another word. He turned back to Commander Reed. He straightened his back, bringing his heels together with a soft click. In the middle of the bustling airport terminal, General Marcus Thompson, one of the most decorated and respected military leaders of his generation, brought his hand up in a crisp, perfect salute. It was not a gesture for the crowd. It was a gesture of profound, personal respect from one warrior to another. The 10 SEALs behind her immediately followed his lead, their hands snapping to their brows in perfect unison. The sight was breathtaking. 11 military figures, one a legendary general and the others elite operators, saluting a quiet woman in a gray t-shirt. The message was unmistakable. This was not just a commander. This was royalty in their world. Evelyn Reed held their gaze for a moment, then gave a single, sharp nod of acknowledgement. The salute was returned. The hierarchy of the universe had been righted. The story of what happened at Checkpoint 7 spread through the airport with the speed of a jet engine. First, it was hushed whispers among the TSA agents, who looked at the now empty space where Miller had stood with a mixture of fear and fascination. Then it was the passengers, calling their loved ones, posting on social media. "You will not believe what I just saw at LAX." The initial posts were fragmented, filled with disbelief. Some TSA guy yelled at a random lady, and a general showed up and saluted her. She saved a guy's life, and then like 10 Navy SEALs appeared out of nowhere. Within hours, the narrative began to coalesce. Snippets of cell phone video emerged, grainy footage of Evelyn performing CPR, of the general's powerful speech, of the breathtaking moment of the salute. The story became a viral phenomenon, a modern-day fable for an age starved of genuine heroes. It was dubbed the Legend of Commander Reed, or more simply, the LAX takedown. It became a symbol of everything people felt was right and wrong with the world. It was a story of quiet competence triumphing over loud-mouthed bureaucracy, of earned respect vanquishing unearned authority, of the hidden, uncelebrated heroes who walk among us every day. The official response was swift and decisive. The Transportation Security Administration, facing a public relations nightmare, launched an immediate and thorough investigation. Agent Miller was suspended without pay, and the footage from every security camera was reviewed in painstaking detail. The official report, when it was released, was a damning indictment of his behavior and a glowing testament to Commander Reed's actions. Miller was summarily fired, his career in federal service over. But his punishment did not end there. In a move orchestrated by a group of high-ranking veterans within the Department of Homeland Security, Miller was mandated to attend a series of intensive seminars as a condition of avoiding further civil penalties. These were not your typical corporate sensitivity training sessions. They were held at a VFW hall and were taught by combat veterans from every branch of the service. They taught him about the true meaning of the flag, about the sacrifices represented by the medals he had never seen, about the invisible wounds carried by the quiet men and women who pass through his checkpoint every day. We see him months later, sitting in a plastic chair, listening to a grizzled Marine gunnery sergeant speak about his time in Fallujah. Miller is no longer arrogant. He is humbled, his eyes downcast, listening, truly listening, for the first time in his life. He was learning the lesson that Evelyn Reed had taught him without saying a word, that the measure of a person is not in the volume of their voice, but in the depth of their character. Evelyn, for her part, wanted nothing to do with the fame. She never responded to the dozens of media requests that flooded her inbox. When a persistent reporter finally tracked her down at a coffee shop near her home, she offered only a simple, direct statement. "The paramedics saved that man's life. I just helped. The real heroes are the ones like Petty Officer Daniel Danny Boy Chun, the man we were flying to honor. He gave everything. His is the story you should be telling." She then politely ended the interview and walked away, leaving the reporter with a profound sense of having been in the presence of something truly rare. She continued her journey to the memorial, where she stood with her team and delivered a eulogy for her fallen friend that was so powerful in its quiet, understated grief that it left everyone in attendance speechless. The symbolic artifact of the event became the security footage itself. Labeled Checkpoint 7 Incident, the video was incorporated into the national TSA training curriculum. It was shown to every new recruit, a powerful, real-world lesson. The training manual now had a new, bolded section. Assumptions are the enemy of security. Respect is the foundation of it. At LAX, the agents at Checkpoint 7 became known for their professionalism and courtesy, especially towards those who looked like they had seen the harder edges of the world. An unofficial, laminated photo of Commander Reed, taken from a screenshot of the viral video, was pinned to the bulletin board in their break room. Underneath it, someone had typed a simple caption: "Watch, listen, learn." The legend had become institutional memory. A year passed. The world, for the most part, moved on. The viral storm subsided, leaving behind the quiet, enduring legacy of that day. At LAX, a new TSA agent, a young woman barely out of her teens named Maria, stood at Checkpoint 7. She watched as an elderly man approached, his back stooped with age, wearing a faded cap that read "Korea Veteran." He moved slowly, fumbling with his shoes, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to lift his bag onto the conveyor belt. Another agent, a jaded veteran of the checkpoint, sighed impatiently. But Maria, who had been shown the Checkpoint 7 incident video on her first day of training, stepped forward. She gently stopped the older agent with a hand on his arm. "I've got this, John," she said quietly. She approached the veteran with a warm, respectful smile. "Sir, please, allow me to help you with that," she said, carefully lifting his bag for him. "Take your time. We have all the time in the world." The old man looked up, surprised and grateful, and his eyes welled with tears. "Thank you, young lady," he whispered. "Thank you." Maria simply nodded, her actions a small, quiet echo of the lesson taught a year before. The story of Commander Reed was no longer just a story, it was a standard. It was institutional folklore, a cautionary tale told to rookies to remind them that behind every face is a history they cannot see, and that true professionalism is not about wielding power, but about showing respect. The legend had ensured that the quiet heroes of the world would be met not with condescension, but with the dignity they had so profoundly earned. It was a legacy not of a single dramatic event, but of 1,000 small, decent acts that followed in its wake. This is the nature of true impact. It is not always a sudden, explosive change. More often, it is a quiet, steady pressure that alters the landscape over time. Commander Evelyn Reed never sought a legacy. She was a professional who lived by a code of silent competence and selfless service. She would never know that her actions on one ordinary afternoon would ripple outwards, creating a new culture of respect in a place that desperately needed it. She would never know that her quiet strength had become a teaching tool, a moral compass for a new generation of public servants. True legacy is not a monument carved from stone or a name etched on a plaque. It is not what you leave behind in a box for others to see. It is what you inspire to continue forward in the actions of others. It is the standard you set, the lesson you teach, the quiet, unwavering example of a life lived with honor and purpose. It is the understanding that the most powerful voice is often the one that doesn't speak, but acts. It is the knowledge that character is not revealed in the spotlight, but in the crucible of a crisis, in the simple, uncelebrated moments of choice between arrogance and respect. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud ignorance, and where true character is the only measure of worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.